Patricia stared through the open front door at the oak tree that was dropping its leaves all over the front lawn. She had a feeling she'd just missed something important. Several minutes before, she'd heard the sound again. This time, she couldn't talk to herself out of it. She had left the bedroom and come out into the hallway. When she looked down the stairs, the front door was standing wide open. Heart racing, she'd run to Samantha's room and peered in. One glance showed her heart rate. Okay, her worst nightmare wasn't playing out. But why was the front door open? Grabbing a pair of knitting needles and holding them in front of her like a knife, she crept through the house, checking for an intruder. There was nothing. Patricia closed the door, turned the deadbolt, and pressed her hands against the door, pushing with all her strength as if she could shove away reality, maybe press it into some other form. Pulling her hands back abruptly, sucked in her breath. There was something she hadn't considered. What if someone came through the still open door while she searched the house? She turned and ran up the stairs to Samantha's room. She nearly collapsed in relief. Everything was okay. Samantha was awake. She sat up in bed, the covers pulled up to her neck, her fist clenched, and her knuckles stark white. Tears made her eyes sparkle in the faint light from her bedside lamp. Patricia sat down next to her daughter. She wanted to pull Samantha into a tight hug, a never-let-you-go hug, but Samantha wouldn't like that. All she tolerated was the slightest touch. So Patricia briefly placed her hand on Samantha's shoulder before she said, "I know you miss her. I miss her too." Samantha blinked and 2 tears escaped her eyes, meandering down her lean cheeks. She didn't bother to wipe them away. Patricia sat next to Samantha for a long time, but neither mother nor daughter spoke again. Finally, Patricia stood, kissed the top of her daughter's head, and returned to her huge bed. Samantha waited for her mother to leave before she moved. She lay on her back watching the light and shadow play cat and mouse on her ceiling. If Susie was here, she'd make up some story about the shadows and light, about them fighting each other or dancing or something. She was always making up things. Susie got that from their dad. Even though their mum was the artist, and their dad was the one who went to work in a suit and tie and did stuff for business that neither Samantha nor Susie understood, he was the one who loved stories. In his free time, he was always either reading a book or watching a movie. He could make up good stories too. When he was home, the girls had always had an original story at bedtime. Their mum wouldn't even try to make up a story. "I'll read you a story instead," she would say when their dad was out of town. Now she didn't say instead, she just asked what book she was reading tonight. One of the stories their dad made up was about a little boy who had a secret place in a hidden room in his house. From that room he was able to solve all of his problems, no matter where they were. Well, no matter what they were, sorry. He told hundreds of these stories, making up a new problem for the boy to solve each time. Susie was convinced these stories meant there was a secret room in their house. She was always asking their dad about it. His answer was always the same. He'd pretend to zip his lips shut and throw away an invisible key. Susie said she thought the way to the secret room was in their dad's office at the back of the house. Samantha thought it was a story, and she was glad the office was always locked so Susie couldn't talk her into getting into trouble for looking for the secret room. Now the office wasn't locked because her dad was gone, but Susie no longer talked about looking for a secret room. Samantha pressed her lips together, disgusted with herself for thinking about Susie and the stupid secret room. Then she thought about the sounds she heard at night. She tried to convince herself she imagined them. That had to be true, because when she looked outside, she never saw anything at all. But lying here alone in the silence, in the strange halfway land of the night, she couldn't quite convince herself that she'd made it all up. She was pretty sure something had been outside, but what, and why? In the brisk late morning air, Patricia and Jeannie sat side by side in the porch swing, padded with yellow floral cushions. Patricia was aware that, to any passers-by, she and Jeannie were part of an idyllic scene. Both women wearing wide-brimmed straw hats to shade their faces from the sun that slanted onto the porch, sipped tea to ward off the full chill. They probably looked as relaxed as could be. They weren't, or at least Patricia wasn't. Patricia studied her friend. Jeannie was almost her perfect opposite in size and colouring. Whereas Patricia was tall and thin with dark hair, Jeannie was short and plump with blonde hair. In spite of these differences, both women used to have one quality in common. They both smiled and laughed easily. Now, Patricia couldn't do that anymore. Patricia took a shaky breath. I'm wondering if I should take Samantha to a different counsellor. She cringed at the way her voice seemed to scar the air. Rhonda is nice, and Samantha likes her. I think, honestly, it's hard to tell. She waved away Fly. But I talked to Rhoda last week, and she said Samantha's stuck. Samantha is clearly keeping something to herself, but nothing Rhoda is doing will get her to talk. Samantha has always done things in her own way, Jeannie pointed out. She grinned. That child has an opinion about everything. Patricia attempted a smile, but only got about halfway there. Remember how she harangued Susie relentlessly about naming that tree? Jeannie gestured at the ancient oak. What's his name? Oliver. Patricia started crying. Jeannie sat down her tea and took Patricia's hand. I'm sorry, that was insensitive. Patricia wiped her eyes and shook her head. It's been a year. There aren't any shoulds when it comes to losing a child. Isn't that what your counsellor told you? Patricia nodded. No rulebook. They sipped tea in silence for several minutes. Patricia watched Oliver drop another dozen leaves. The previous night's persistent breeze had taken hundreds of Oliver's remaining leaves. He didn't have many left on his gnarled branches. Pretty soon, he'd need a scarf. Jeannie patted Patricia's knee. You're thinking about Oliver's scarf. It made Patricia literally ache to think about how 4-year-old Susie had run inside after Oliver had dropped his last leaf that first year she named him. When she'd returned, she held one of the neck scarves Jeannie had knitted for her. Patricia gazed at Oliver and felt like she could see the scene from 3 years before unfolding in front of her right now. The scene was a little fuzzy in places, but otherwise it was almost real. Her little arms crossed, her brow furrowed. Susie said, he'll get cold, 'cause he doesn't have leaves. She was dressed in a bright orange jacket. When Susie found out that the scarf wasn't big enough for Oliver, she was heartbroken, until Patricia suggested Susie ask her godmother to knit a scarf specifically for Oliver. Now, Jeannie knitted a new scarf for Oliver every year. I've already knitted it, Jeannie whispered. Tears spilled down Patricia's cheeks. She was surprised she still had tears to cry. She was always anthropomorphizing. Oh my gosh, what is that word? Anthropomorphizing. Anthropomorphizing? Okay, Patricia said. I never saw a problem with it. There wasn't a problem with it. She was an why can't I read today? Empathetic child with a vivid imagination. Which is why she was so easily lured. Ooh. Empathetic. That's got something to do with agony and stuff. Patricia didn't realise her own voice. Normally soft, it was now as hard and rough as Oliver's bark. I should have discouraged her flights of fancy. I should have. Stop it! Jeannie shifted to face Patricia. Not all the murdered children were like Susie. Oh, missing children. You don't know that it would have been different if she'd been a different kind of child. You can't keep trying to find reasons to blame yourself. Patricia looked down. I hated that place, she whispered. It always seemed creepy to me. But Chica. But Susie loved it. Chica, Susie, same thing. Jeannie frowned. Are you sure you want to go over this again? I need to. No, you don't. Yes, I do. I can't just forget. Why not? How are you helping Susie by torturing yourself with the details over and over? Patricia wanted to yell at Jeannie to shut up, but she didn't have the energy. Jeannie took both of Patricia's hands. Your daughter was murdered by a serial killer. She was lured to her death in a place where she should have been safe. There. We've dug it up again. Feel better? Patricia yanked her hands back and started to stand. Jeannie grabbed her arm and held her in place, her grip pinching Patricia's skin. Don't run away! Jeannie shouted. Then she lowered her voice but kept it firm, just shy of scolding. You can't dredge up the past and then run away from it. If you insist on trotting it out to torture yourself regularly, at least you should do it head on. If you don't, you'll be running away your whole life, and you'll never be able to let Susie go. A car zipped by on the road, its engine revving. The smell of exhaust wafted up to the porch. Something about the odour erased Patricia's anger. She was wearing her favourite sweater, the one you knitted for her, magenta with pink stripes, Jeannie said. She wanted sequins, Patricia said, and you wouldn't let me put any on the sweater. So you put rhinestones on her jeans instead. Ginny laughed. You were really angry with me. Patricia wiped her eyes. Stupid thing to be angry about. Ginny gently squished Patricia's arm, then let her go. A breeze curled up on the porch from the yard, and Patricia shivered. Susie watched Samantha lean on the rake and scowl at Oliver. Huh? Oh, okay. It's not his fault, Susie said. He can't help it that his leaves land on the ground when he lets them go, Samantha sighed. Susie tried not to be annoyed. I said I'd do it, she reminded Samantha. Right after they'd gotten home that afternoon, their mum said, maybe you can do a little raking before dinner. Susie had said, I'll do it. But before Susie could get to the rake, Samantha grabbed it, and now she wouldn't let go. She'd rather do it right, and not like doing it, than let someone else do it wrong. Fine, let Samantha rake. Susie would hang out with Oliver. Listening to the rasp and scuff of the rake, Susie went around to the back side of his trunk, away from the road, and hugged him. Oliver smelled smoky and moist. Laying the side of her face against his trunk, she listened. Sometimes when she listened really hard, she was sure she could hear him breathing. Hi, Samantha. The greeting came from the sidewalk. Susie peered around Oliver to see who was calling out to her sister. It was Drew, the kid with the scooter and the blonde spiky hair. Today he was alone. Holding onto his scooter, Drew looked across the yard. Samantha stared back at him as if he was a bull about to charge her. Drew waved. I see you at school a lot, and I just thought I'd say hi. I'm Drew. Samantha glanced around like she suspected a trap. Susie wanted to go to her side and encourage her to talk to the kid, but Samantha would hate that, so Susie stayed hidden and watched. Drew scratched his nose, and his scooter fell over. He bent to pick it up. Hi, Samantha said. Drew straightened and grinned. Samantha held the rake like a weapon. Susie didn't think that looked very friendly. Go over to him, Susie hissed at her sister. Samantha ignored her. Susie knew listening to someone else's conversation was rude, according to her mother, so she ran over to the side yard and started talking to the bedraggled plants in the flower beds. Why would they... Oh, would they tell her why her mum was ignoring them? Samantha wished the boy would go away. She also hoped he would stay. He was cute. Oh. Drew... Oh, but was he just being nice or just messing around with her? Drew stepped closer so he was right at the edge of the sidewalk. I was really sorry about what happened to your sister. Samantha looked down, but she managed to mumble, Thank you. She took a tentative step toward the sidewalk. Drew looked at Samantha. Then he looked up at the house. He lowered his voice. Do you ever see her? I'm so confused. Did I miss something? Because Susie's there. What? I'm so confused. Is Susie a ghost now? I don't know what's happening. Drew looked at Samantha. Then he looked up at the house. He lowered his voice. Do you ever see her? Samantha went still. She felt the blood rush from her face, and she gripped the rake so hard it hurt. Drew dropped his scooter and took several steps into the yard. Then he opened his mouth and words tumbled out so fast they piled up on top of each other. I'm not trying to be mean, and I'm not making fun, really. It's just that I believe in ghosts, and I think people who die can stay around if they want. Okay, I think Susie is a ghost. I had an uncle who died, and I saw him the night he died. And then he came back for a couple of years after that. He was waiting for my dad to forgive him for something. I think ghosts hang around if they want something, you know? So I was just asking, and I didn't mean to upset you. Dinner's ready in 5, Samantha's mum called from the porch. She didn't notice Drew. Samantha had no idea what to say, so she just said, okay, then turned around to head inside. Bye, Drew called. Okay, I think I get it now. I was so confused. One minute Susie's there, the next minute Drew comes up. He's like, I'm sorry about your sister. Samantha couldn't go to sleep because she kept thinking about Drew, about what he'd said. Thinking about Drew was kind of nice. Thinking about what he said was not. His words bounced around in her head. Ghosts hang around if they want something. A faint snick and swish sound came from downstairs. Samantha sat up. She knew exactly what that sound was. Should she go down or wait? The tremors that always started at that sound began at her feet and scrabbled up her legs. Ignoring them, she jumped out of bed and padded across her room and into the hall. No sound came from her mum's room. Nothing from downstairs now either. But was that just a cold draft? Samantha clenched her jaw and forced herself down the stairs. At the bottom she paused, then she tiptoed through the dining room and peered into the kitchen. As she knew it would be, the back door was standing wide open, and now she could hear the other noise, coming from the porch. Oh, thud, tap, thud, tap. Moaning, she pushed through her terror. She ran through the kitchen, and she slammed and locked the back door. Then she sprinted as fast as she could back up to her bed. Once there, she tried to convince herself she was making everything up. In all the months she had been seeing her, Rhonda had never put her back to Samantha before. Was this some kind of test? Samantha frowned and tried to figure out what was going on. She looked around the room. It was plain and neat, the kind of room Samantha liked. All it had in it was a thick tan rug, Rhonda's listening chair, a cream-coloured plush chair with a low back and fat arms, a tan and cream striped sofa, and a child-sized wood table next to a trunk filled with toys. The room was interesting to Samantha because it extended out from the house, like a box, hovering about 2 feet off the ground. 3 of the box's sides were glass. A long sigh from Rhonda made Samantha blink, and Rhonda finally swiveled back to face her. "I'm sorry," Rhonda said. "I've been trying to figure something out." The crinkle between her thick black brows was unusual. Rhonda didn't frown. Mostly she smiled too much, in Samantha's opinion. It wasn't normal, especially for someone who listened to other people's problems all day. "I like figuring things out," Samantha said. "I know you do." Rhonda brushed back her long black hair. Samantha stared at Rhonda's big brown eyes. "So what are you trying to figure out?" she said. "I'm trying to figure out how to keep Mum from sending you to someone else." Samantha jerked her head up. "Why does my mum want to send me to someplace else?" "Because you're not making progress with me." "What does that mean?" Rhonda leaned forward. "Samantha, I know something is stuck in your head. A thought, a belief, something you keep thinking is trapped there, in your brain, and you're not letting it out." Rhonda was right, but Samantha didn't tell her that. Samantha stared at her neatly tied navy blue sneakers. She liked things to be in their right places. She didn't like messy. Change was messy. Therapy was messy too. Before she'd started seeing Rhonda, her mum had taken her to 2 other people who were there to help her. Both had wanted her to play with a messy pile of toys in a messy room. She'd begged her mum not to make her go back. Finally, her mum brought her here. She didn't love it here, but she didn't hate it either. Rhonda was different. This room was different. Samantha was okay with them both. "We had a fight," she said. She had to tell Rhonda what was stuck, so her mum wouldn't make her go someplace else. "You and Susie?" Samantha nodded. "Okay," Rhonda scribbled on a notepad. That used to bug Samantha, the scribbling, but she'd gotten used to it. It was about 𝓑𝓮𝓬𝓸𝓶𝓮. 𝓑𝓮𝓫𝓮? Gretchen? Why do they have to have complicated names? It was about Greg. Let's call him Greg. Oh no, because that's going to be confusing with Fetch. I'm calling him Greg. It was about Greg. Who's Greg? The doll. Oh no. It's a doll. It's a doll. Okay, we got a doll called Greg. The doll my mum said we had to share. Whose doll was it? Mum gave it to both of us together. Samantha rolled her eyes. I hated that. I want mine to be mine. I don't take Susie's stuff. So I should have my own stuff. Okay, but Mum said we had to share. Rhonda nodded. So I tried to explain to Susie that we should each get Greg for a certain time. When Greg was with me, she'd study. Sorry, I can't stop laughing at Greg. Rhonda smiled and nodded again. Susie got upset about that. She said Greg didn't like to study. Greg liked to go to the zoo. She wanted Greg to hang out with her stuffed animals all the time. She said if Greg had to study, she'd be sad. Samantha stopped and remembered Susie standing in her room, hands on her hips. Her lower lip jutted out. When Samantha insisted that Greg needed to study, Susie threw a tantrum. Sorry. Oh, give me a sec. She cried, but she'll hate that. So what happened? Rhonda asked. Samantha swung her legs. When I tried to put Greg in front of a book, Susie grabbed her and ran off. Why am I laughing at Greg? Why? This didn't happen in Fetch. Oh my god. She what? Samantha counted her breaths the way Rhonda had taught her. It was supposed to help with the feeling that bugs were crawling up her legs. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the fourth exhale, Samantha said she ran away and hid Greg. Then she came back and told me what she'd done. I told her I'd find Greg, and Susie was upset again. Before that night, she told me she was going to find a better place for Greg, and I'd never find her now. Samantha fisted her hands and held them in front of her face. Then she said, I think she was thinking about where to hide Greg, and that's why she got taken. She thought whoever took her would help her hide this stupid doll. Rhonda took a deep breath. Thank you for telling me. Am I not stuck anymore? I don't think you are. Samantha nodded once. Good. Where is the doll now? Rhonda asked. I haven't found it. Oh, okay. I see where this is going. I see where this is going. Susie thought Samantha was unusually talkative today. She hadn't shut up since their mum had picked her up from the funny glass house Samantha visited 3 times a week. Even though Samantha was talking about boring stuff, about multiplying and dividing fives, their mums seemed to be okay with listening. She kept nodding as she drove through traffic. She didn't smile though, neither did Samantha. Samantha was so stiff, she looked like a robot. She sounded like a robot too. It was weird. She was talking as if she had to talk or something bad was happening. If she had to talk, couldn't she talk about something good? How about we talk about cute things? Susie asked. Samantha and her mum must have not heard her because Samantha kept talking about numbers and math. Susie sighed. Susie, you're a ghost. Did you not know that? What was the point in hanging out with them if they were going to ignore her? Susie turned and looked at Samantha's right ear. Samantha's ears weren't pierced like Susie's were. Susie liked to wear pretty coloured earrings. Samantha refused to have hers pierced because she didn't want holes in her ears. Susie wondered, if I blow hard enough, can I push all the boring words out of her head? Me. Turning, Susie blew as hard as she could into Samantha's ears. Samantha stopped talking. Ha! Susie grinned. Were you done with your story? Susie's mum asked Samantha. Samantha didn't answer. She sat perfectly still in her seat. Susie wasn't sure the silence was any better than the non-stop chatter. It wasn't a soft, comfortable silence, like a cushy plush bear. It was a sharp silence, like the pointy ends of metal things poking at your skin. The silence hurt her ears, and her heart. Susie started singing to drown out the silence. No one sang with her, but she didn't care. She sang until Susie's mum turned onto the road. Then, Susie stopped and waited eagerly to spot her house and check on Oliver. Susie's mum paused to wait for a car to pass before turning into their driveway. The car's blinker did its click-tick until Susie's mum made the turn. Susie mimicked the noise. No one told her to stop. Oliver had lost a lot more leaves. He only had a few left. Would they last long enough? Susie sat on the end of Samantha's bed and watched her sister read a book. Samantha seemed tense. She held the book stiffly, and she took a long time to turn the pages. I have a confession, Susie said. Samantha didn't look up. I miss you guys when we're apart. And I know you miss me too. Samantha turned a page. Her hand trembled. And I miss Greg. Do you miss her? Oh wait, it's a girl doll, of course it is. And I miss Greg. Do you miss him too? Samantha kept reading. Susie never liked it when Samantha ignored her, but she didn't let it shut her up. I don't know why, but I can't remember where I hid Greg. Susie chewed on a knuckle. I don't think she stopped talking. This wasn't working. Samantha wasn't going to help her. Why couldn't Susie remember where she hid Greg? She remembered how angry and upset she was that Samantha was going to make Greg study. Greg was a sensitive doll. Freckled and curly, blonde-haired, Greg's soft, round face was painted with a shy smile, the kind of smile that told Susie that she was easily scared. When Susie hid Greg, she'd been wearing a pink and purple polka dot dress that Jeannie made. The dress was supposed to be fun. It was supposed to help Greg be happier. But then Samantha was going to put pressure on Greg to learn stuff. Not even polka dots could win out over that. Susie knew that Greg still needed to be with her. Susie was the only person who understood her. She knew what it was like to want to be happy and have fun in a world that wanted you to learn and keep getting better at things. She couldn't leave Greg alone, lost in some forgotten hiding spot. She wished Samantha would listen. Susie reached over the book Samantha was holding. She waved her hand around. Samantha's face got white, and she held very still. What was she thinking? Susie wondered. She would have asked, but she knew Samantha wouldn't answer her. Sometimes Samantha acted like this, and sometimes Samantha acted normal. Their grandma used to say, "That's Samantha. She's a hard child to read, but Susie is an open book." If Susie was so open, why couldn't Samantha get what Susie was trying to tell her? How could Susie make Samantha understand? Samantha leaped out of bed and put her book neatly on the corner of her desk. Sitting in her straight-backed white desk chair, she opened a drawer and pulled out construction paper and crayons. That was it. Maybe Susie could draw a picture. Samantha would see it and remember Greg. Or maybe if Susie drew a picture, she'd remember where she'd hidden Greg. Susie stared at the paper and crayons. Would Samantha share? "Samantha, could you come here, please?" their mother called. Perfect. Susie waited for Samantha to leave the room, and then she stole a pink piece of paper and a purple crayon that had barely been used. She plunked herself down on Samantha's blue rug and stretched out on her stomach. Tucking her tongue firmly between her lips, Susie started drawing. It took all of her concentration to make sure the drawing showed up on the page, but it did. Drawing was all she could do. If she wrote a note, Samantha wouldn't read it. "Don't draw too long," Susie's mum said, out in the hallway. "I'll be in to tuck you in soon." Susie heard Samantha's footsteps coming. She hurried to finish her drawing. When she was done, she left it lying on the floor and retreated to the window seat. Tucking herself into a small ball, Susie looked out the window. She couldn't see Oliver because the window reflected Samantha's bright room. She could see, though, a couple of leaves pushing against the window. Leaning forward, she realized that they belonged to Ivy, the vine that climbed up the trellis above the porch roof. Susie smiled. She remembered when her dad had put that trellis on the house. Her mum's ivy, which Susie had named Ivy, of course, had climbed up the porch posts at the front of the house, and her mum had wanted to cut it. Susie thought that would be sad. "Can't you let Ivy climb higher?" she'd asked. Her mum said, "Well, if we had a trellis." Now it looked like Ivy had reached the top of the trellis and was trying to climb into Samantha's room. Would Ivy have better luck getting Samantha to talk? Samantha burst into her room and headed toward her desk. If she wanted to finish her drawing tonight, she'd have to hurry. Before she reached her desk, though, Samantha noticed something on the floor. Nothing besides the rug was supposed to be on the floor, but a piece of pink paper lay on it. The paper hadn't been there when she left the room. She was sure of it. Her mum had been with her downstairs the whole time. No one else was in the house. That meant Samantha didn't want to look. If she looked, no longer in a hurry to draw, Samantha stared at the pink paper for a very long time. Eventually, she convinced herself that picking it up was better than letting it lie there. As long as it was on the floor, Samantha could come up with all kinds of scary reasons for it to be there. If she picked it up, she'd know what it was for sure. Susie always thought Samantha didn't have much imagination. That wasn't true. The problem was Samantha had way too much imagination. She had so much imagination that she could scare herself silly with just a thought or two. Taking slow, quiet steps, Samantha walked toward the rug. She didn't take her eyes off the paper as she walked. She couldn't have said why. Did she think it was going to leap off the floor and attack her? And do what? Give her paper cuts? Samantha had gotten one of those when she was little. Susie had cried when she saw the blood. Samantha didn't. Yes, it stung a little, but she thought it was more interesting than painful. How could something as flimsy as paper cut you? When Samantha picked up the paper, she saw some squiggly purple lines, but as she gazed at the paper and the squiggly lines, they began to form into shapes that made some kind of sense. The drawing had 3 parts, like the panels in newspaper comics. The first part, on the far left of the page, was a drawing of 2 little girls. One had a ponytail, and one had hair that was flying all around her face. The flying-haired girl held what looked like a mirror in one hand. She extended the mirror out toward what seemed to be a baby floating in the air. The other hand was held out to the ponytailed girl. Between the baby and the girl, a big chick with spiky teeth held up its hands. Huh? The second part of the drawing, which was separated from the first part by a vertical line, showed the moon over a house that looked a little like Samantha's house. The flying-haired girl was walking away from the house, holding hands with that same big chick. To the right of this second drawing, another vertical line separated the second drawing from the third one. The third one also had a moon, a house, and the flying-haired girl walking away hand in hand with the chick. But after the third drawing there was a heavy dark line. Samantha could see where the crayon had been moved over and over until it created a thick, slashing shape that Samantha didn't understand. Frowning, she stared at the picture. Had she drawn it and then forgotten? If only she could believe that. "I wish you could just talk to me," Susie whispered. "I miss when we used to talk. I know you thought I talked too much, but you still listened. I'd really like someone to listen." She was so frustrated. This reminded her of playing charades. Once, she'd played charades at her friend Chloe's birthday party. Susie liked all games, but charades wasn't as fun as she wanted it to be. She'd thought she was being so clear with her acted-out clues, but no one got what she was trying to make them see. That is a reference to Scott Cawthon. No one guessed right. When she told her mum about it later, her mum said, "You don't think the same way other people do. That's a good thing. You're super creative." Not creative enough, Susie thought as she stared at the drawing she'd left on the rug. What else could she do? Jumping up from the window seat, Susie ran to Samantha's desk. She noticed Samantha looked up from the pink and purple drawing when she rushed past, but Susie didn't bother to say anything. When Samantha was acting like this, there was no point. Besides, Susie wanted to draw something else. At Samantha's desk, Susie grabbed a piece of pale yellow paper and a black crayon. She plopped down in Samantha's desk chair and started again. Interesting.